welcome everyone once again in this breakout room on political participation of people with disabilities. I'm very happy you joined this webinar. As we have heard, we are going to have two presentations in this breakout room and then an open discussion. And Adriana Caballero Perez is going to start, and she's going to be followed by Gordana Rajkov and Mimica Živadinovic from Center of Independent Living of People with Disabilities from Serbia. In the discussion, you can just unmute yourself if you want to. You can raise also your hand, or you can type questions in the chat. Just be polite. This is the only rule we consider, and let everyone finish to speak. Okay, Adriana, then I would pass my word to you. Thank you again for being here, and maybe we can start with your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Regina, and hello, everyone. I was so happy to get this invitation, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. So I will share my screen now, and I will address the introduction of our today's topic. Okay. So please let me know, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Adriana Caballero. I am a lawyer from Colombia, and I am part of a training network called DARE. And DARE stands for Disability Advocacy Research in Europe. And this is a training network focused on the rights of persons with disabilities. And we are a group of PhD students working in this topic. I am doing my PhD studies in law at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And just to let you know briefly about my research, I can tell you that my project explores the provision and use of electoral assistive devices or assistive technology to enable persons with disabilities to effectively exercise their right to vote in practice. So, for example, by electoral assistive devices, room number 3 is probably discussing more about these devices, but some examples include voting instructions formatted in Braille. In some countries, persons with disabilities are using voter education guides in easy-to-read language, or just a magnifier device is considered as a technology that can be provided to be used by persons with disabilities to mark their ballot secretly and independently. So my project centers basically on the opportunity of voters to enjoy this right. And this is endorsed in Article 29 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which I'm going to refer as the CRPD in this presentation. And today, our topic is barriers to participate in political life that persons with disabilities encounter. So I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. So first, I would like to say that, as most of you may already know, political participation includes a wide range of activities through which people express their opinions on their countries. And in the case of Europe and member states of the European Union, well, they express their opinions about the European Union and how their countries are being governed. So political participation of persons with disabilities includes participation in elections through voting and also as candidates. It also involves holding offices at any branch of the government, joining and forming unions or political parties, organizations, and in general, participation in policy. And it also involves other activities, for example, contacting elected officials and attending political meetings is part of the right of persons with disabilities to participate in political life. Now, when discussing barriers to political participation, a good starting point is the concept of citizenship. And briefly, active citizenship, who is an active citizen, is associated with at least 3 dimensions. A sense of security by making effective use of human rights, autonomy to define one's needs, and influence through participation in public and private life. This means that the concept of citizenship is at the core of a true democracy. And the key message here is that the inclusion of persons with disabilities is fundamental to a true democracy. But what happens in practice is that persons with disabilities seem not to belong to the realm of active citizenship. And this is caused by a public, mainly by a public imagination that conceives most persons with disabilities as passive citizens, as helpless individuals, as opposed to empowered citizens to participate in political life. And as excluded, persons with disabilities are denied the opportunity of being an active citizen and exercising their political rights. Now, we can say that the exclusion of persons with disabilities from political participation is promoted either by law and policy, accessibility barriers, or indirectly by discriminatory practices, other discriminatory practices. Now, overall, most forms of exclusion are embedded in a paternalistic and protective approach towards persons with disabilities. And this is discriminatory and violates the requirement of equality, which is expressed in general international human rights law instruments, of course, mainly the UN CRPD, but also at the European level in the European Convention on Human Rights. In terms of statutory barriers, you probably know that there are guardianship laws and policies that bar persons with disabilities from exercising the right to vote. And you may already also know that discriminatory law that restricts the legal capacity and autonomy of persons with disabilities is particularly focused on persons with intellectual and mental disabilities. Now, we also mentioned before procedural barriers to political participation. So what happens is that voters with disabilities encounter also inaccessible polling places. For example, when the main entrance door to the polling station has steps and there is no ramp or platform lift for wheelchair users. There are also inaccessible voting materials. For example, some voters cannot read ballot papers properly because the ballot font size is too small. Colors used on ballot papers create confusion, and political party manifestos, for example, use unfamiliar words and jargon. And all these limit some voters' ability to understand the content of these manifestos. Also, voters with disabilities do not have access to electoral assistive devices. Let's say there is no available magnifier at a polling station to enlarge the text on the ballot paper. And of course, there are communication barriers that limit access to information. Now, other barriers that I mentioned before was that persons with disabilities encounter include poorly trained poll workers, right? So for example, some poll workers are not properly trained in assisting voters with disabilities and limit these voters' right to cast a secret ballot, an independent ballot, even when they have been assisted to vote. Also, voters with disabilities are not well educated voters as voters. And this means persons with disabilities do not have the same opportunities to understand how the voting procedure works and how to cast their ballots, how to participate in political life, how to make decisions regarding their own countries, which is mainly political participation. And some authors also talk about existing informal barriers. So, for example, the family on whom persons with disabilities are dependent for support can create barriers to participation. Let's say some families may make the decisions on behalf of persons with disabilities that hinder their participation in political life. Some families may prevent their children with disabilities or their relatives with disabilities to join in organizations of persons with disabilities. So all these also constitute discriminatory barriers to political participation. Now, to recap, today we will discuss about at least these three categories of barriers to participation. Statutory barriers, again, related to laws and policies. Procedural barriers, mainly related to inaccessible polling stations, public buildings to gather with other persons with disabilities to participate in political life, and other discriminatory barriers, including inappropriate assistance or voter education or education as active members in the society. So let's keep these groups in mind, and we will come back to this shortly. Thank you so much. Okay, now I will.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for this introduction. I would directly hand over to Gordana and Mimica, and you asked me to share your presentation, right? So I'm going to share it, and you will just tell me whenever I should switch slides.
Yeah, you can do it.
Mm-hmm. 1 second. Now, does everybody see the screen?
Yes, but with a box blocking. Yep.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I start?
Yes, please, Gordana.
No, it's Mimica speaking.
Mimica, yes, please, Mimica.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be here with you all. Gordana and myself are from Center for Independent Living Serbia, and we would like to share our experience from this project, political participation, or walk the talk with persons with disabilities. You can go. Next slide. Just briefly about the organization. As you can see, we are now in 25th of our work. So we will mark this 25 years of working this at the end of this year. And all our scope is mainly to promote the social approach to disability, to promoting new services for persons with disabilities, awareness raising through all these activities, and promoting the rights of women with disability as well. Yeah, you can go. This project, Walk the Talk with Persons with Disabilities, is, I think, fourth, maybe fifth in a row that we implemented regarding voting rights to persons with disabilities. And the goals of this special project is some lack of accessible information and the polling station, securing the secret voting for people with visual disabilities, to clearing the procedures for voting from home, and to enable the rights for persons with intellectual disabilities. The objective of the project was to develop the disability inclusive consultation group between key stakeholders in election process. This group was consisted of representatives of National Association of Persons with Disability, blind, deaf, physical disabilities, as well as persons with autism and intellectual disabilities. Representative of Republic Election Commission, some professionals as lawyers, persons in political science as well. Then to engage public advocacy, awareness raising and campaign for accessible elections, and to train a group of young persons, mainly women with disabilities, on political participation. Actually, what does it mean? What does it mean to be politically involved in everyday life in Serbia? Main accomplishments was signing the memorandum of understanding between our organization and President of Republic Election Commission, then advocating for technical support Republic Election Commission to ease the political participation and voting process, establishing this disability inclusive consultation group, and the main result actually was that Republic Election Commission adopt 10 specific changes in order to monitor all polling places in Serbia, and to train members of local election boards how to assist or help persons with disability when come to the polling station. Yeah, I mentioned that. So we have also a media campaign, published some articles in newspapers, and one video material with different topics related to inclusive elections, and referring to problems that different kind of disabilities facing with different obstacles when come to polling stations. For example, in monitoring the accessibility of polling places, we can say that maybe 70% of them are accessible physically, but almost 100% is inaccessible for people with sensory disabilities, meaning blind and deaf persons.
Yes, we also have a training.
Yeah, we have a training for young
members of the Republic Election committee
Mm.
and provide feedback to their materials that they published, and we conduct and publish research on political participation of persons with disability during COVID pandemic in Serbia. And we also had 50 participants who passed through the capacity building training and mentoring to sustain political participation and to amplify voices and women and youth with disabilities in actions. Next.
Yeah. You can go next. So the motto of this campaign was the point is in attitude, use your head, translated into English. So we put it also on our social media network, Facebook and Instagram. So it went really well.
And it went 45 days before the election took place.
Yeah.
Which was in June.
Yeah.
Last year.
Yeah, these elections we had last year, 2020, during the COVID pandemic. So we did a lot of work, although we were in a lockdown. So I think that's it.
All right, thank you very much, both of you, Mimica and
Thank
Gordana.
you.
Thank you. Now it's time for the discussion. For that, I also hand over again to Adriana. She's going to moderate it, and I'll watch the chat. You can also, write in the chat, and I will just monitor it so Adriana doesn't have to keep everything.
Thank you. Thank you, Regina, and thank you so much to Gordana for the presentation of the project, Walk the Talk with Persons with Disabilities from Independent Living in Serbia. So today we will discuss about this topic of barriers or obstacles to participation in political life that persons with disabilities encounter. And the idea is that based on your knowledge, your personal experiences, you can share freely your opinion about this topic with the audience. I will ask some questions just to motivate you to participate, but please, of course, feel free to intervene with an additional question, topic that you would like to discuss with the audience. And when you intervene, please say your name first and where exactly are you from, so we can know who you are and from which particular country you are talking about. So just keep in mind that we can talk about laws, policies as barriers, or we can talk about inaccessibility and barriers in general. And perhaps you already noticed that personally I have a bias because that's my research topic on talking about voting. But it doesn't mean, again, that political participation does not include a broad set of activities, as we with Gordana already talked about. And also there are some other discriminatory barriers that probably are even more interesting than laws and policies or accessibility barriers, because these other discriminatory barriers are related to daily life, right? With family relationships and with community relationships. So just to start this discussion, let me ask you, in your country, how easy is it to participate in political life for a person with a disability? You can talk about any type of activity concerning political participation. So that's the question. How easy is it to participate in political life for a person with a disability? Is it a difficult task? Why? What happens? So who wants to start? Yeah, please. No, Regina.
I just wanted to ask if you see when people raise their hands. Do you see it, Adriana, on the screen?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm gonna.
perfect.
Okay. Yes, I think Miroslava, Mima. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Miroslava Mima Ivanovic. You can call me Mima, is more simple. From Montenegro. I'm executive director of the Initiative of Youth with Disabilities of Boca. In the Montenegro, we have, let's say, quite good legal framework. Some amendments to the law on election of councillors and members of parliament were issued by organizations of persons with disabilities through the procedure of adoption of the law before the Parliament of Montenegro, but also by the civil activists who initiated the procedure before the Constitutional Court of Montenegro for evaluation of constitutionality and legality of norms related to voting rights of persons with intellectual and mental disabilities who are actually in most cases deprived of their legal capacity. We also have some accessibility standards related to physical accessibility and also accessibility of public debates held by the national TV and radio station, but in practice, those laws are not implemented very well. Let's say they are implemented very poorly, in fact. And because of that, I initiated the court proceeding for protection from disability-based discrimination, as I couldn't access my voting place on the elections in 2018, and it was first final judgment related to equal participation of persons with disabilities in political and public life in Montenegro. Actually, the judgment was implemented regarding my voting place where the discrimination occurred against me, but the other voting places are not made accessible yet. As in other areas, we lack the awareness of decision makers and duty bearers that they conduct very serious human rights violations by non-implementing the laws in this area. Actually, this is a very important area where persons with disabilities in Montenegro, as in Serbia, as Milica and Gordana said, are not aware and are not informed about their rights and what are available mechanisms to protect them when they are violated. Yes, and some similar projects were held also were implemented in Montenegro, but actually there is a need to repeat always the actually same awareness raising campaigns among persons with disabilities and among general public and among stakeholders and decision makers. Every time some new election are coming, because we have some situation when that we very often fastly forgot our duties related to persons with disabilities. So there is a need for repeating the same activities in order to keep duty bearers and persons with disabilities aware of their rights and duties. Thank you. If you have questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, I have questions. Thank you so much, Mima. It's been so interesting to listen to you. Thank you for sharing. And before addressing questions to you in particular, I want to ask the audience if there is some other participant from Montenegro as well as Mima. So if there is no, okay, Mima, again, back to you. And I'm sorry because I don't have the information, but the first question I want to ask you is Montenegro a state party to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities?
Sorry, I didn't mention that. So just could you repeat the question one more time, because I'm not sure if I heard it properly.
Thank you, Mima. Yes, I am asking if Montenegro is a state party to the UN Convention on the Rights.
UN Convention, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we ratified UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2009. Okay. And actually, according to our law, the international laws have priority in implementation when our legal system, our legal framework regulates some specific area contrary to the CRPD. But actually, duty bearers do not implement that constitutional norm, because CRPD is not implemented directly in Montenegro.
Okay, I see. So, and I was asking this because, well, that is, of course, fundamental if we are talking about compliance with international legal obligations, right? But also, Mima, my question to you was addressed because I want to know if these legal protections of voting rights were adopted because of the convention, after the convention, before the convention. So now you explain that situation. And in that case, my next question to you, and then we can switch to another country. But to talk to you, Mima, when you talk about courts and the role played by judges in addressing barriers, what do you think is the impact of judges, of the judiciary in every single country when addressing barriers to political participation?
I think the role of judiciary is very important, of judges it is also, but what I would emphasize is the importance of ombudsman, of prosecutors, and of inspections, or some similar, let's say, or bodies who have legal duties and opportunity to initiate ex officio the proceedings for protection of human rights of persons with disabilities. Actually, the violation of voting rights are also recognized by the criminal code in our country. Also, the ombudsman can initiate the proceeding for protection of voting rights of persons with disabilities, but in Montenegro we don't have such proceedings initiated by relevant institutions. So whole burden to fight against violation of rights of persons with disabilities in area of political and public life, but also in other areas, is on persons with disabilities and members of their families. We shouldn't, and very often we hear by the state and local officials that actually statistics of initiated proceedings shows that there are no so many cases of disability-based discrimination, although we all know that they are, but persons with disabilities are not encouraged, or I don't know, to initiate proceedings for protection of disability-based discrimination. But actually what I always emphasize is that there are institutions who are obliged to actually use those mechanisms of protection of human rights of persons with disabilities, and that they should do that. And if they don't do that, they have to be sanctioned, actually punished for such behavior. So the role of judges is very important, but judge can play his or her role only if we have some proceeding initiated. So first step is to initiate proceeding, from my point of view. Maybe I'm wrong. I would like to hear by others other opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mima. I think you have raised many important aspects, including the issue of incorporation in the case of those states that are party to the convention. The incorporation of the CRPD prompts legal development, policy development, and when that incorporation doesn't take place, of course, the responsibility of countries to address barriers to political participation remain, but it's even more complex, the situation, because we are talking about a breach of also international legal obligations. Mima also talked about how different actors play a role in facilitating addressing these barriers to political participation. And thank you so much for saying that, because clearly ombudsman, human rights institutions, and all officials who are accountable in the country are, of course, are accountable for addressing these barriers. And the last thing I want to say, just to close your intervention, is about accessibility standards. You talk about that and how that is taking place in Montenegro, and that's another key factor. It's not just about laws or policies that provide formally for accessibility, but also how that can be implemented in practice, and that include indicators and include standards that in time benchmarks to measure if changes have taken place in practice. Now, who else wants to? I know that there are two people, Radosh and Daniela, so I think Radosh goes first. Please, Radosh.
Hi. Thanks, Adriana.
Hey.
It's good to see you. I'm Radosh. I'm from Serbia, but currently I'm residing in UK, where I work at the University of Leeds at the very same project that Adriana is working on, that she mentioned before. I had a two questions, and the first one is for you, Adriana, and probably comes hand in hand with your comment and the question on the role of the judges. So recently, the European Court of Human Rights brought saddening and disturbing decision that it is lawful for the countries to restrict the voting rights of people deprived of legal capacity, and basically they said it is fine to restrict people's voting right on the ground of lack of mental skills for voting. And my question is for you, like, what ramifications beyond people with disabilities this decision might have? Because how easy or how difficult can it be to draw the boundary between who possesses the mental skills to exercise the right to vote and who don't possess it? Because we see obviously the outcome many regimes and political regimes we have would imply to conclude that a vast number of people do not possess such mental skills. You can easily argue, you know, something like that. So I'm wondering, you know, what such lack of understanding among the judges, what kind of ramifications it might have, you know, for wider society if we are going to measure mental skills of people and to require a proof if they are to exercise the right to vote. And my second question refers to your argument from the beginning of this conversation when you said that the right to political participation extends much beyond voting rights and includes many other expressions of political opinions. And I'm wondering, what barriers do you see in exercising the right to political assembly? And do you see the right to political assembly, peaceful assembly, as part of the corpus of the right to political participation? Because surprisingly, to me, this is not mentioned in Article 29. Although this right is contained in the Convention on the Civil Political Rights, right? So what we know that in 80s and 90s, disabled people's movement was maybe more radical than it is today, and many hard-won battles were won by exercising the right to peaceful assembly, by doing the protests, political rallies, marches, gatherings to make our group visible. So yeah, I'm wondering what barriers today exist in this field, and this is the question to both panelists, to you, Gordon, and Mimica, and you, Adriana, as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Radosh. If it is okay for Gordana, I think we can start with this second question, and then we will go back to the judgments the recent judgments that you mentioned. So if Gordana, you want to talk about your take on Radosh's intervention, yes, please go ahead.
I would agree with Radosh that disability movement in Serbia, but also in many other countries, is not so radical as it used to be, and it certainly should be, in a way, moved to be more radical and give comments and instructions to the people who are ruling the country and controlling all this. But it also depends on the situation in the country. So in Serbia at the moment, we do have a national organization of persons with disability, but they are more in alliance with the government than to be ready to criticize what government is doing. And one of the reasons, of course, is that those organizations are funded by the government And so there it is not very good to rock the boat. We tried a few times to organize some public meetings or protest before the assembly, but with no much success. And actually, we are trying to work with those bodies on the ground, understand each other and support them rather than to be aggressive in our demands. And in some cases, it proved to be a good strategy because, for example, working with the Republic Electoral Commission, we managed to persuade them to adopt the decision that in the whole country, local election commission will make an assessment of accessibility of all voting places in Serbia. And in our proposal, they asked them to include persons with disabilities in that assessment. And this is for the first time that in Serbia now we have analysis and assessment how many places, voting places, are accessible or not, which of them would be made accessible, and which one should be changed. And this obligation, local commission will have to do every 2 years and to monitor how it is, whether and how it is done. And it looked to us that it was more successful and better to communicate with them, to make them understand the issue, rather than going out in front of the building and protesting why it is not accessible. So sometimes it is better to try to find partners in the, to have partnership with the bodies who could make different decisions. Of course, in some very extreme cases, when nothing else will do the result, I think that protesting in front of some government buildings or whatever is the last step to use. I think it's better to try to do it in a better way and try everything to make them as partners. I think that Radosh was thinking of that time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much. And about this,
if I may just
yes.
add, maybe in Serbia we had the misfortune having elections almost every year. So you did some work and then find the partners and people who understand, and then there are elections and then people change and you have to do it all over again, finding partners. So that's also one of tricky tasks to accomplish, but we are working on that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, well, to be honest, Radosh, I haven't given a comprehensively understanding or not thought about the right of peaceful assembly of persons with disabilities. Although, as you has already said, this right is persons with disabilities, as all citizens, as all citizens are entitled to this right based on other international human rights law, if that's the case, and of course based on domestic law. I think that I am not sure how this topic was addressed during the negotiation process of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I think that what the draft committee did to implicitly address this right was to emphasize the need to ensure that persons with disabilities have the right to freedom of expression. But again, as you said, the convention limits this right, or not limits, that let's say the focus lies on the expression of the will of persons with disabilities as voters. And of course, under Article 29, there are legal guarantees to take part in the conduct of public affairs in general. But definitely, I think that the key issue here could be those monitoring, reporting, and conducting advocacy regarding measures taken for the management of protests, including examining the impact of use of force in human rights violations in state responses. And notably, most international human rights law instruments have been either adopted or adopted by states because there were people behind, advocates, human rights advocates behind, right? And in my country, which is Colombia, in legal changes take place because of protests against the duration, for example, of the armed conflict that we were dealing with. And so it means that this right of peaceful assembly is fundamental for ensuring participation, not only, in public and private life and in political life. So I don't know if someone else from the audience would like to address this particular topic of the right of peaceful assembly of persons with disabilities. Just let me know. You can just, Laura, thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah, this is just a thought, and I don't know. I have no idea how the laws are in Germany, in my country, with the protection of against unfair, like use of force against protesters when it comes to people with mental disabilities and developmental I'm autistic and I have several mental illnesses, and my permanent fear is being incarcerated at some point and being institutionalized, and because that is a tool that can be used. And I've just started advocacy some years ago, and I'm not really well connected in Germany. I'm more connected to British, Irish, and US activists, especially in the autistic community. And I just dream of being radical someday and dream of organizing stuff, but I'm really scared, I have to say, because I know that is for people with like me, for people with mental disabilities and neurodivergent people, there's always a danger of losing many forms of freedom when when you become inconvenient to people.
Yes, of course, Laura. Yeah, that's the price that many human rights defenders have paid and the risk that human rights defenders keep facing, right, in Europe and around the world. So thank you for sharing that, your thoughts on that regard. Do you want to say something else about it?
Yeah, but in more general, so I wait.
Okay, yeah, please. Okay, so I will go back to Radosh again, just because, and then Daniela, because I know you are in line. But Radosh mentioned that recently, and disappointing, the European Court of Human Rights released two judgments. One is concerning Denmark, and the other one, the most recent one, is concerning Spain. And in both cases, the main conclusion, the conclusion of the court is that guardianship orders allow states to disenfranchise persons with disabilities, despite their right to vote under the European Convention on Human Rights. And so this, I can think at least two implications of these recent judgments. The first one is that clearly the court has departed itself from international human rights law on disability. So here, what the court didn't do was to interpret the European Convention on Human Rights in light with a more specific disability treaty, which is the UN CRPD. The UN CRPD clearly entitles all persons with disabilities with equal recognition before the law. That's concerning legal capacity. And then, of course, everyone, all persons with disabilities are entitled with right to vote in elections. So it's that those judgments are very interesting to see how the court did not address and did not interpret Article 29 as a legally binding article for Denmark and for Spain. So it's not, we are talking about definitely of two states parties to the convention, European Convention, and to the CRPD. And the second implication of these recent judgments, in my opinion, is that there is also a departure from the existing case law of the court itself, concerning voting rights in the context of disability. So it seemed that based on previous judgments, the court had already considered that a state party violate the right to vote of persons with disabilities based on legal capacity grounds, and that it was clear that that a legal obligation of the states parties was to ensure that all persons with disabilities could vote on an equal basis with others. So it is shocking, it is surprising, again, it is disappointing. And yeah, it's just that the court departed from international human rights law binding instruments and from its own case law, previous judgments. So yeah, let's, not sure if someone else wants to say something about this specific topic, the judgments, the recent judgments. Okay, so let's go to Daniela now, so we can hear you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Daniela. I also work for Democracy International here in Germany, but I'm American, so I voted in the US, and I also have Serbian origin, so I see some Serbians on the call. You listed in your introduction some of the issues that people with disabilities might face at the polling location. And I know, I mean, at least in Germany, definitely, but in many places in Europe and increasingly also in the US, voting by mail is becoming increasingly more popular. This is, I mean, of course, also thanks to COVID, because people are preferring to stay at home. But I mean, even in Germany, traditionally, people do vote by mail. It's happening right now with an election that's at the end of the month, where the voting is ongoing. And I'm wondering, because obviously you have expertise on this, and I'm definitely not an expert on this topic by any means, but I find it interesting. Would you recommend expanding voting by mail so that people then with disabilities could access the ballot more easily, like from the comfort of their own home? And I mean, by expanding, I mean that all people would automatically get a ballot by post, or at least how it is in the German case, you get a application directly at home to request the ballot, because there seems to be then an increase accessibility here, but I'm also not the expert. So I don't know if you think that expanding this practice of postal voting tackles some of these issues, or at least it's a step in the right direction to tackle those barriers, or what would you recommend? And there was also a question by Daniel in the chat, maybe it kind of works in this direction. What countries are doing particularly well with increasing access to participation, and how they're doing that?
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you so much for your questions. The answer to your first question is yes. I will definitely promote voting remotely, only if that voting procedure is available on an equal basis to all voters. It means it's not a voting procedure addressed to only persons with disabilities, because in that case, what happens is that it constitutes a discriminatory practice, right? And most importantly, a cover form of discrimination. Like I've heard different voters with disabilities saying, hey, I was recommended to vote by post to avoid facing accessibility barriers at the polling stations by an election official. So that's a cover form of discrimination. The thing is that we could make available online voting platforms for everyone. Voting at polling stations for everyone, accessible for everyone, so that a person with a disability, in recognition of their agency, can make the decision which is the most convenient voting procedure to use in their cases based on their individual needs. So that's the most important thing. All kind of alternative measures, alternative voting procedures are welcome, always only if those are made available on an equal basis to others. So just keep in mind that key message. And yeah, so I think that's the most important thing. I think maybe on this issue, Mima, do you want to say something? I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I will try to be short. Actually, we also in Montenegro, I think in other countries had that issue regarding the using possibility to vote by mail as the argument to, let's say, exclude persons with disabilities from voting places, to have them closed in their homes and to actually be segregated. And what is additionally from my side, from my point of view, very important, additionally to let's say equal opportunities and equal access to voting rights of persons with disabilities when it comes to voting by mail or on voting places is also autonomy and actually decision made by person with disability. Autonomy actually is individual autonomy is one of the principles of UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So I think the will of persons with disabilities should be also incorporated in providing as much opportunities to persons with disabilities and not to limit them. If we have voting places now available, I think we should add as opportunity voting by mail, but not to actually, let's say, stop or to restrict this opportunity to vote on voting places, because there is opportunity to vote by email. Thank you.
Thank you, Mima.
Actually, also, I just to add one more sentence. If we, for example, prescribe, if I don't know, UN or some of our countries prescribes that there is opportunity to vote only by mail. Sorry. Persons with disabilities should have also opportunity to vote on voting places, because it could be understood as reasonable accommodation in some cases for persons with disabilities. Maybe they would be more comfortable to vote somewhere outside of their homes, because maybe they would be feel pressured, or I don't know, by family members or something like that. So there is also need for reasonable accommodation where persons with disabilities could have opportunity to some alternative methods which are not available for persons without disabilities. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mima. Just before going to Laura, and I know we need to finish now, Daniela, I think that one good experience is Estonia, because their people have multiple voting procedures, but I am not pretty sure about how inclusive all they are. But the thing is that everyone there, any eligible voter, can make the decision regarding which voting procedure to apply, to follow. So maybe Estonia is a very interesting experience. And Laura, please go ahead before finishing.
It's funny, I just voted today. I just put my crosses on regarding voting in Germany, it's quite easy to access on mail voting. And what I haven't seen yet is accessible language. That would be nice. Text in accessible language. Some cities are making progress with that. On some websites, you can have stuff in accessible language, but I feel like the German bureaucratic language is quite inaccessible to everyone, and especially for people with disabilities. It might be even harder just to understand what you have to put in what envelope, and so, and that's that can be quite a challenge. But there is actually on the mail voting form, you can choose if you fill it out yourself, or if some assistant helps you, and they have to give their name too. So that is thought of. Concerning active participation, we have in our city, in Heidelberg, there is a council of disabled people in the city. So they have a permanent seat in what you call it, like city parliament. Don't know what the right term is.
Yeah.
And but they 5 years ago, I was looking into that, and before my conditions, physical conditions got worse, and there was only one person with mental disability, and the other were physical disabilities, so we're quite underrepresented. And she was begging me to kind of consider taking her place when she leaves in some years. And what I was thinking earlier is that the fundamental democratic culture, or let's call it political culture, is quite ableist in itself.
Yeah.
So the idea for me, an autistic person with quite large anxiety issues, being in a parliament setting where you have to be loud, where you might have to be aggressive, where you might need to compromise, where you might need to lie. Those are things I'm not able to do. And the whole political culture is kind of based on like a kind of bully strength rhetoric and demeanor, and that is something that is not accessible for many disabled people, and especially for people with mental disabilities or like neurodivergent people. And it's hard to change that when you won't be noticed if you don't shout the loudest. And that's what's keeping me from wanting to do that, because I know the political game changes and damages non-disabled people, and I don't want to get more broken by that system. And I don't know yet what way my activism, what shape my activism will take, but I'm really scared of politics, actually.
Of course, you should protect yourself. Of course, that comes first. And second, yes, you are totally right. Political participation is embedded in able values, body values, and power relationships. And yes, of course, to participate in political life means face those power relationships, but also try to defeat them. So that's why maybe if you consider you are well protected, you definitely should take part in that. Regina, I think I need to go to you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. I think we could go on, and I'm sorry to finish it at that point. But I want to thank all of you who came today, who took part, and also especially thank you to Adriana and to Mimica and Donna. Thank you for your input. It was, I think, really helpful. And we can all wave our hands or make emojis. Thank you very much. I will send a link into the chat. It's a very, very short form. Maybe you could fill it out. It's about how you like the session, but also if there's something you want to share with us regarding the topic, you can write it in. And as we said, we will bring all ideas of the session to the conference on the future of Europe. So you can share in this form once again your thoughts. It can be about the topic of our discussion today or in general. You can fill it out now or whenever you have time. It's really very, very short. It's five questions, and 2 of them are name and surname. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to remind you that we have a session also next week. Feel warmly invited to join. It's about smart citizens and wise decisions, about sustainability. Yes, and I wish you all a good evening. Thank you. And
thank you so much.
I hope to see you once more.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Regina.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.